Welcome. You're listening to How I Did That, a storytelling podcast. Let's jump into today's episode.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. How are you? I'm really
Good,
excited
thank
to
you.
have you guys on today. I was waiting for Sarah to join as well. She said she'll be joining in a minute.
That's excellent.
Yes. You guys can both introduce yourselves
Cool.
and tell us a bit about, your background and how you got into what you're doing. So,
Well, my name is David Cote. I am an immigration and refugee lawyer based here in Windsor, Ontario. I grew up in Windsor, Ontario, and spent a lot of time here, but went to university at the University of Ottawa. After that, I went to Cape Town in South Africa and did my master's in law, which is a fantastic experience. I would encourage anyone who can to go do that. And then I came back to Windsor to do my articles and with the Crown Attorney's Office. And so, that's what all lawyers have to do to become admitted to the Law Society. Then after that, I was accepted to an internship program with the Canadian Bar Association and Foreign Affairs Canada, and went back to South Africa and worked with an organization there called Lawyers for Human Rights. They do a lot of refugee work as well, and I was in the refugee and immigration detention clinic with them. And the 8-month internship turned into a 10-year career in South Africa. And I came back to Canada in 2016 and have been practicing here since then.
oh, wow. Amazing. So I'm going to have a lot of questions about that. But Stephen, I'll let you introduce yourself as well.
Okay. My name is Stephen Cote. I am currently a student in the Paralegal program at St. Clair College. My educational background is in international Indigenous studies at the University of Calgary. I graduated there, I think, in 2016 or 2017. And I did an internship actually with the organization that David worked for called Lawyers for Human Rights. And so we did a lot of consulting with clients and things like that.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
And then Sarah, I see that she's on.
Yeah,
Hello.
I'm in now.
Well, thank you for connecting me with them, by the way. Let's go back to high school, beginning of college. How did you know that you wanted to get into what you did? So maybe David, you can start, and then Stephen, you can also give your answer.
So in high school, I had every intention of becoming a doctor. I took all the science courses, I took the math courses and whatnot, and I had sort of planned my future around that. And then calculus happened, and I did not get through calculus. I really, really hated it and figured out that numbers are not my thing. So then I decided that, I thought I was always interested in history and politics, with law being sort of a background to that. So I was accepted to the University of Ottawa, and my intention there was to study in both French and English. And I went in doing political science at first and ended up hating that too. And so while I was there, I discovered the civil law program at the Faculty of Law, and I was accepted into the program. And so that's when I started my legal career. I had thought that I would try to join the Foreign Service, Canadian Foreign Service. And I thought maybe with a law background to make it easier for me to do that. But as I progressed, I actually started to enjoy law itself as a field of study. And I decided that I wanted to become admitted as a lawyer eventually. And so, all the different things that sort of evolved from there led me to an actual legal career.
Okay, so when you were, like you said, you wanted to be a doctor, and then you went to the University of Ottawa, and that was after you decided not to become a doctor. You decided to do a different program there, but you didn't have lawyer in mind, but you did want to get into Foreign Affairs Canada. That's what it was. Yeah,
and I went to a presentation they were having on campus one day about people that they were hiring, and somebody said, "Oh, I have a poli-sci degree, master's in poli-sci degree," and they said, "We are not hiring anybody with a poli-sci background for maybe 10 years." And it really showed that it wasn't going to be an option, if I really wanted to get into that career. So I looked at other options, and actually the civil law degree program looked very interesting, partly because it was all in French, and I really wanted to study exclusively in French, and so it allowed me to do that. It's a little bit different because it's through the Quebec system, so it's called a license in civil law, which would allow you then to do your articles there and to be admitted as a lawyer. So it is sort of at a bachelor's level, But the program at Ottawa is a national program, so it allows you to do 3 years in civil law, and then you could do one additional year for common law, and that would allow you to practice anywhere in the country. And so the goal was to get both law degrees. That would also open me up to having more international experience, which fed into my foreign service goals. So that's what the process there was. But poli-sci was not the way to get into the foreign service at that time. And the nice thing was, I guess my first legal loophole, if you study in French, you don't have to write the LSATs. And so I was able to get into it without having to write the LSATs.
So they don't have any kind of exam if you're in Quebec?
No, you have to have at least your cégep degree, which is their sort of end of secondary school. And that meant I had to have at least 1 year of university in Ontario to equal their cégep diploma. And so the poli-sci did come in handy there, because it did allow me to do my 1 year and then get into the program.
And you didn't need a full 4 years degree to get into that law program?
No, the civil law was sort of the undergrad, and then the 1 year common law was the graduate.
Oh, okay, that's interesting, because usually when I hear of lawyers, it's like you do 4 years of undergrad and then you do 4 years of law school and so on. Okay, cool. So then, Stephen, how did you decide to get into this field?
Well, I took a bit of a different route when I was in high school. I actually dropped out of high school when I was about 18 or so. And when I was about 25, or 24, 25, that was when I started to kind of get into academics. So I ended up getting my high school degree, or my high school diploma. And then I worked as a truck driver for about 3 years. And then I moved to Calgary, and I went to the University of Calgary. I studied international Indigenous studies because I have a great deal of respect for Indigenous cultures and Indigenous ways of knowing. And so it was a pretty amazing program, actually. It's very small, even though the University of Calgary is a very large school. I believe now it's considered a political science, but when I was there, it was part of the arts program. And I ended up getting to know a lot of Blackfoot elders. I still have a lot of friends that are over there. And there was one program in particular where there was an Indigenous elder by the name of Reg Crowshoe. He did a course in his teepee, actually, where he basically he taught a lot of the Blackfoot ceremonies, including smudge ceremonies and stuff like that. I mean, it was a fascinating program. I would recommend it to anybody, because it really does give a really accurate portrayal of Indigenous culture and Indigenous ways of knowing. And so David had sort of inspired me to want to get into the law field, because I just wanted to do something that kind of made a difference. I ended up going to South Africa as part, and I actually got school credit for it, but I went to South Africa and did an internship there. And so they had me sort of focusing on a lot of Indigenous groups that were there for Lawyers for Human Rights. And so I ended up doing a lot of consultations with clients in Mpumalanga and in Limpopo and places like that. And so, yeah, it was a really interesting experience to be able to go and do that.
Oh, wow. Okay. So Sarah, since you're on as well and you guys are in the same cohort, can you explain a bit about how you got into this field?
It's interesting because growing up, I knew that I've always wanted to go into law. When I was in high school in particular, I started to take law classes, and I had this one teacher. His name was Mr. Garlick, and he was a very successful lawyer. I believe he's retired now, and there's this really famous case in Windsor that I think a lot of people know, and it basically was a story on how a fly landed in someone's drink, and because of that, this person wanted to sue for emotional damage for thousands and thousands of dollars. So my professor was the lawyer for that case, and it's all over the newspapers.
I've never heard of it.
It's actually really fascinated about law. So it started maybe when I was 15. I started to take some law classes. He was my teacher. He was the only law teacher in my school. And then I got into university. I majored in criminology, and I also majored in psychology. So psychology, you get to understand why things happen the way they do. So whenever you partner that up with law, it makes it more interesting. So I did that for 4 years. When I finished, I knew that I wanted to do something related to law. I just didn't know what exactly. There was law school. I didn't really know much about paralegals. And it's funny because a friend of mine who is studying to be an architect is the one who told me what a paralegal was. I didn't know what a paralegal was because paralegals have not been around that much. It's still kind of like a new type of field. So one day I just checked my messages and she said, hey, I think you should try this program. And here I am right now, I'm almost finished. So also growing up, I moved around a lot. I lived in Hamilton, I lived in Dearborn, which is across the border. I got to see a lot of things and I've always questioned why things were the way they were. I've always questioned the law because growing up, I found it to be unfair at times, especially dealing with racism. I was living in Detroit when 9/11 happened, and that impacted us so much, we had to move to Windsor. So law has always been something that I've been super passionate about. And growing up as a minority, and I'm a first generation Libyan Canadian, meaning that there are no Libyans who were ever born here. So I'm kind of like the first one, which is interesting because I have that power now to decide how the future generations can live. So that's kind of where it all started from when I was in high school. I didn't know much about law, but I thought it was fascinating. And then I didn't realize it was going to develop to like a passion and to like a future of mine, you know?
Oh, okay. Yeah, it's interesting because I just wanted to ask you and Stephen, like how you both got into it since you're in the same field now, but you both have a completely different backgrounds, right? Okay, so then back to David, I guess. So after you graduated from that common law program, which is kind of where we ended with your story, where did you go from there?
After I graduated from the common law program, while I was doing it, I was a little bit depressed and, it was kind of slow and I wasn't enjoying it very much. And so I needed to give myself a goal. And I decided that I wanted to do my master's afterwards. And I wanted to do my master's abroad outside of Canada. And so I looked at a number of different options and I applied to schools in South Africa, Australia, and eventually I was accepted to the University of Cape Town to do my master's. And so, that sort of gave me, more energy to complete what I was doing. And so at the time I was working for the, what's now the Canada Border Services Agency as a student. And I was doing customs inspections in Windsor as a student. So I finished that up and then I went to South Africa in about February of 2004. And the master's program at University of Cape Town was amazing. It was 4 courses and a lot of extra time. And so I got to explore Cape Town and the area. I got to meet some really, really great friends. But I also, wanted to do something with my time. So I started to volunteer at the legal clinic. And I started to assist refugee claimants and asylum seekers in South Africa with adapting to South African life, but also trying to get through the system. The immigration system all over the world is very, very difficult. And I think, like Sarah said, it's often very, very unfair. And then in a place like South Africa, where there's so much poverty as well, and a lot of competition for resources, the system, becomes very unfair and very oppressive. And so we were trying to assist people just even getting through the front door. One of my first cases was somebody who was arrested and held in a makeshift jail downstairs in the government office. And so it really sparked an interest in international refugee law, international immigration as well, and eventually my interest in immigration detention work, which is one of the main focuses I've had in my career. So I, had a great time in Cape Town, and then I extended my time there for about 6 months after the master's was more or less completed, and then came back to Canada where I started my exams for the bar. It was a little bit different back then. You had to actually attend 4 months of classes in the summertime, and then you start your articles afterwards. And so I did that from May until about August. And then from September 2005 until about August of 2006, I was working with the Crown Attorney's Office as their articling student, which meant that I did their provincial offenses cases. That includes Highway Traffic Act. I was the prosecutor for those. I did some peace bond applications on behalf of the Crown. And then, I was admitted to the Law Society in July of 2006. But I stayed on as a contract worker for a little while longer. And while I was doing that, I applied for an internship program through the Canadian Bar Association, like I said before, and I was accepted to that application, to that program. And that allowed me to go back to South Africa, and I started interning with an organization called Lawyers for Human Rights, which Steve mentioned earlier, and working in the Refugee and Migrant Rights Project there, but with a specific focus on immigration detention. And so during my first 2 years with LHR, the organization, I attended weekly the detention center for immigrants there. And at first it was simply about observing the conditions of detention, but after a while we decided to start doing more court interventions. And so we brought individual cases to court to have people who are being unlawfully detained released. And that sort of started a 10-year-long project of immigration detention and having the provisions of the Immigration Act declared unconstitutional because there was no oversight. There was no control. There was very little law about it at the time. And so, that became one of my focus areas for the next 10 years. I was able to get a work permit back then, at least, and was able to continue working at LHR. I took over the position of the program manager for the strategic litigation unit. So I got to do a lot of cases outside of the refugee field. We worked in international criminal law, access to justice. We did some cases with the African Commission, and a couple of cases at the Constitutional Court of South Africa. So with that experience, I was able to really get more exposure to the international system, which is what I really enjoyed. I got to go to Geneva a couple of times and attend the executive committee for the UNHCR meetings. Got to travel all over the continent to meet different lawyers and practitioners, and I learned so much from lawyers who were working in places like Kenya and South Sudan and Ethiopia, Mozambique. It was fantastic to get that experience. And then, unfortunately, my work permit application for extension was denied. And I went through about 6 years of going back and forth to court, getting court orders to try to remain. I had to renew my permit every 3 months to stay in the country. And eventually I was told that they were not going to renew it and I should leave the country by November 2016. And I took their advice so as not to end up in a detention center myself. And so I came back to Canada and have started practicing here with all the wealth of experience that I was able to gather in South Africa. So it's been a great journey that way.
Awesome. Wow. Thank you so much. I was making notes the whole time because I'm going to go back and ask you all these questions.
So cool.
I'll get back to the questions I have for you in a bit. Stephen, I wanted to jump to you. Can you talk a bit about your experience in South Africa and a couple of the other experiences, I guess, that helped shape your decision to get into the field you are now?
Sure, yes. Well, I got into, when I went to South Africa, I ended up working in the land and housing department of Lawyers for Human Rights. And I worked with a paralegal in the office. And he was actually a fascinating man because he spoke all of the languages. He was from Mpumalanga. And he spoke all of the local languages. And I don't know if you're familiar with that area. There's a lot of different languages from just people within all of these communities. It was amazing to go with somebody with that kind of knowledge. And he wasn't a lawyer, he was a paralegal. That was sort of my first experience dealing with a paralegal. When we would go into these communities, I mean, for myself, I come from a real place of privilege. I'm a white male. I've lived a fairly privileged life. So for me to go to some of these communities and see the kind of poverty that exists in these areas, it's a real eye-opening experience. But the warmth that you feel from meeting people are very happy to see you because they know that you're from Lawyers for Human Rights and you're there to try and do your best to bring their case forward. Yeah, that was pretty much my first experience dealing with a paralegal. And so when I came back to Canada, I knew that I wanted to get into the law field because I wanted to get involved somehow. and do something positive. I'm very much influenced by a Mohawk lawyer by the name of Beverly Jacobs. She's actually one of the associate deans at the University of Windsor right now. She was actually a professor of mine at the University of Calgary. She taught Indigenous governance. And so I'm very much inspired by her as well. I knew I wanted to get into the legal field at that point.
When you had mentioned that, like you mentioned you went to South Africa to work with Lawyers for Human Rights, I wanted to backtrack a little. Like if I was in your position, right, a couple of years ago, how would I or how would someone else have the opportunity to go there? Like, what did you apply for something, or how did you end up going there?
Well, I was lucky because David was my brother, and so he was kind of an in that way. But yes, I did have to go through all the normal channels. So I did have to put in an application to do that. I had to submit like a resume and everything, and so that they had all of my records and everything. And so eventually I was approved. Now, it certainly did help that David was my brother, so I knew most of the people that were in the whole thing. You do sort of have to just submit your application into them, and they take a lot of volunteers.
You just submit an application on their website, and people are able to get selected from there. Okay.
Yeah, they'll review it and they'll get in contact with you.
Okay, cool. Also, going back to, when you talked about you were shadowing that paralegal, do you remember any of the cases, or what specifically did you get to see him work on?
Well, I can't really discuss most of the cases. Mm-hmm. There were actually a number of people that I shadowed, but he was doing more of like a land review, like where people were trying to regain their farms and stuff like that. I can't really speak specifically to.
Okay. Confidential and stuff.
Yeah, exactly. But my job primarily doing that was doing historical research, because we would do surveys and stuff like that, and then we would end up going to the archives and try to find evidence of ancestors being in that area, because a lot of the times people in that area would be kind of nomadic, and they would go off to another area, and then if somebody came and settled there, they would assume that it was empty, but that just means that people went somewhere else for that period of time and then came back. A lot of land disputes ended up happening that way, including like different indigenous groups would have disputes in that fashion as well. We would end up going to the National Archives and try to find evidence of people being there at that time.
Okay. And then Sarah, I wanted to ask you about your internship experience. What experience do you have, like in working in the law field, that you think will help or is helping you now, or kind of helped shape your decision to get into law?
I was very active in the University of Windsor. I engaged in something called the Work Study Program. I'm not sure if you've heard about it, but basically an opportunity for students to work on campus, something that's close to their field. So I was already set on the idea that I was going to stick to law. So in my first and second year, I worked for an organization called OPIRG, Ontario Public Interest Research Group. Basically, this is an organization in Ontario that seeks to create a fair community, a diverse community. So almost every university has one of these. And it's just a way to kind of promote everybody on campus to get together, to discuss societal issues, to teach everybody to accept everyone for who they are. So we would engage in workshops, things like that. So we had a little house on California. That was where head office was. And the first year, I remember we set up projects on campus to try to get people to kind of come forward about problems and share things that they've dealt with. For instance, not getting accepted because of, something that you identify as, or maybe like a belief that you have. The first year was we were just trying to eliminate as much, like unfairness on campus as possible. And then we thought about opening a community kitchen. So the house had a little basement, but that basement was empty. So we thought, why don't we try to open a community kitchen where we can have students gather? We had a garden right next door, and we were growing vegetables there, the campus community garden. So we thought, why don't we do something on campus and try to promote eating healthy and promote, like food health, and try to get everyone together. And so we spent a few months putting a project together, and it was very successful. We had CTV News, we had journalists come for the grand opening, and it was so successful. We would grow crops right next to the house. We would get meal donations. We would invite students every day to come visit, whether they, if they were to have a stressful day or if they just wanted to learn more about resources in the community. We were open, and it was a really good way for me to attain those justice skills. So this is where I learned about social justice, is the organization. So I was promoted to a coordinator. I ended up working there 2 years in a row. Unfortunately, the founder passed away, so we had to shut it down. So it kind of pushed me in my third year of university. I wanted to find something else. And this is where I found a research job. And I worked for the Research Ethics Board at the University of Windsor. So it's basically a department that is responsible for ethical research. So if somebody wants to apply for their master's and they want to do testing on people, they have to come through us first. I've worked with so many people. I've worked with people in Windsor Regional Hospital. We had a lot of doctors who were seeking to do clinical trials, so we would have to review that. I worked with Dr. Suzanne McMurphy. She's one of the chairs of my program in criminology, so it was really, really nice. And it was an honor getting to do some projects for her. I realized that I had a passion for research, and it was something that I was good at. So once I finished that contract job, in my last year of university, I worked with an Indigenous researcher. Her name is Dr. Kathy McCloskey, and she, I believe, is one of the only researchers studying the Navajo tribe in North America. So I helped her develop a petition to a really, really big company called Novica. They manufacture things like rugs. So we did a lot of research in terms of like culture appropriation within the Indigenous community. We found that there was that company, they were knocking off designs from Navajos. And if you were to look into Navajo history, there's a lot of cultural appropriation, and just, if you were to look into it, it's really bad. So we kind of took it into our own hands, and we wrote a petition, and we got an Indigenous lawyer involved, and it was very successful. It was a very big lawsuit. It was really interesting to not only learn about law and know about it, but to actually act upon it. Looking back, my 4 years of university, I feel like I basically attained different types of skills: research, social justice. So I would say the people who guided me, professors, organizations, places I worked, that made me realize what law was about. And it's really interesting now, and I'm really grateful for that experience. It was really cool because when I worked for Kathy McCloskey, I was a researcher in the criminology department. When I first started university, I didn't really know much about criminology. I just wanted to study law, but there were really no specific programs to law. There was political science, but that's a little bit different. So I basically went into something not knowing 100% what it was, and I got all this experience. So once I finished university, I felt like I had so much experience, and I was ready to dive into a postgraduate program and practice. I wanted to practice law, I just wasn't sure what I would be. So that's basically my story.
You mentioned about the Aboriginal lawyer that you got involved with, and then Stephen, you mentioned that when you were studying in school, like it was related to Aboriginal law, right?
It wasn't necessarily Indigenous law. It was Indigenous studies. A lot of it focused on oral history and stuff like that. I had one professor named Laurie Villebrin who had an entire class on everything was oral. There was no writing whatsoever. Oral history within Indigenous cultures it's the way knowledge is transferred from generation to generation. People don't, like, Eurocentric culture doesn't consider it to be an accurate portrayal, but it really is. There's a lot of validation that goes along with it because it's done through ceremony, and that's how it's transferred. And Indigenous elders will go their entire lives studying the methods in order to do this. There was the law aspect. As I mentioned, Beverly Jacobs taught Indigenous governance. Indigenous peoples have been governing themselves on this continent for thousands of years. We don't even think of that from a Eurocentric point of view. We think of governance and history in terms of like 300 or 400 years ago, but there's thousands of years of history on this continent with people who have lived there before.
You always hear about Aboriginal rights being taken away, right? That's one really big group, at least in Canada, that I hear of. I never gave attention to the fact that there are a whole group of lawyers working towards helping them, which is really fascinating. And it's a really good thing. So going back to David, where we ended off was that after you graduated, you were working with legal clients, asylum seekers specifically, right? You were helping them in South Africa.
Yep.
And you said that you were there to do your master's and that it was 4 courses, right? But usually masters, well, I'm thinking of like other master's programs like engineering, it's usually a lot longer than just 4 courses. So how long was your program? Was it just a year?
Yeah, so legal masters are just a year long.
Specifically during your master's, do you have to do internships or do you just do studies and then after that you started working in the international immigration?
Yeah, it's mostly just about the studies themselves. It's a very academic program. The law degree, especially now, it's a little bit different when I did it, but now it's very practical and oriented towards the practice of law, whereas the master's is meant to be the academic look at law. How does law fit within society? What are rules, what is justice, those sorts of questions, right? And so that's what the master's was really about. It was just sort of getting away from the practice and more about the academics.
For students who do want to kind of follow that path, like say I wanted to study in South Africa, you just applied on the university's website, but are there any other specific steps you had to take?
Well, of course, back then I had to apply by mail, but I don't think you have to do that anymore. But yeah, no, you have to get a study visa to be able to go. And the study visa, you have to show that you have health insurance, that you have enough money to take care of yourself and that sort of thing. With the study visa as well, you're allowed to work part-time on campus not just on campus. In South Africa, you're allowed to work part-time up to 20 hours a week. Those things are shifting now. Immigration in South Africa is becoming a lot more restrictive. And so the rules might be different as things develop. There was that part of it. And then I stayed in housing, student housing. It was housing meant for graduate students. And so it was a house that was converted into a couple of rooms for students from all over. Most of the people in my house were from other countries in Africa. It was great. I got to meet people. I went to visit friends in Kenya and Uganda for Christmas, and then got to meet people from all over the world. There were a lot of people, especially from Germany in my year. And that was interesting to see the German take on law, which is, a little bit different than a common law take.
When students are studying in South Africa, how does it translate to them working? Because they're on a study permit, right? Like they're not going to be able to stay there forever unless they get some kind of citizenship, I guess. But you did say the laws are becoming more restricted. So is that for students wanting to study there? It's more restricted now?
For students, for workers, even for permanent residents, it's becoming a lot more restrictive that way. It's just a general tendency towards restricting access to the country.
Going back to what I was saying for international students at the time who were studying there, how does the law translate when you're studying South African law, but then you are going back to your own country to practice it? So aren't the laws different? Because you mentioned you did a couple courses, right, when you came back to Canada. Was that to kind of integrate what you learned with Canadian law and then write an exam?
Yeah, so the master's is very academic. So you're going above what the individual countries talk about law. You're going into how law fits into different societies. And South Africa at that time was really about transitional law. It was about coming from a very repressive, racist regime, having a constitution that was one of the most progressive and remains one of the most progressive in the world. Where does the law fit into that, especially when there's resistance to that progression, and not just within South Africa, but also outside of South Africa? So how does that play out? And that's one of the great things about going abroad and doing a master's, is that you get to see how other countries look at those issues. So you're not into the minutia of what a contract means, in that specific jurisdiction. So when you come back with that, you still, like when I came back, I said I had to do the courses for the Law Society, and that was really about the entrance exam so I could practice law in the province of Ontario. So you come back, and although you have to remember those minutiae of the law, and as Sarah and Steve very well know right now, it's a lot of minutiae, you come back with a different perspective, and you come back with a different look at how the law can and should be applied. And that's the advantage of being able to do a master's abroad.
So was the program like international law, quote unquote?
The degree itself is a master's of law with a specialization in criminal justice, because I had an interest in criminal justice at that time. But I took a course on litigating the Bill of Rights, which was the South African Bill of Rights. So that was very South African specific. One on international criminal law. I did a criminology course on criminology in transition, something to that effect. And then I did another one on justice in transition, which is about how do poorer communities fit into a law that they've been separated from for such a long time? Do they create their own legal networks within their own communities? And how do you integrate those into a larger legal system? And do you want to, or is it better not to? Those sorts of issues. And then my dissertation, which was the major part of the master's program, was on language rights in South African criminal courts and how Afrikaans and English were the two official languages for a long time in the criminal courts. And by 2004, they were still the most commonly used. But you're getting more and more prosecutors and magistrates and judges and people who were speaking indigenous languages, but were required to switch to English in order to have these court processes take place. And what does that mean? How does that translate into justice? How does that translate into bringing indigenous concepts of law into a colonial system, especially when that colonial language is still the medium that it's being conducted in? So those are the issues that we're dealing with. So it really wasn't international law. It was more about philosophy of law.
So then after that, you mentioned that you worked in, international immigration, refugee law, and detention work. Can you explain a bit more on what you did there?
So for the detention work, every week I went out to the detention center, and at the time I was seeing between 15 and 20 clients a day, getting statements from them about the reasons why they were detained, giving them some idea of what the system is like, what they can expect. So at 30 days, you'll get a notice. They'll have to extend your detention at 90 days. You'll have to get a travel document, that sort of stuff. And also identifying cases that were ripe for litigation, being able to go to the High Court, which is the standard court in South Africa, and asking for people to be released who are being held unlawfully. And we had to select those cases carefully. We only had very, very limited resources. And how do you use those resources in the fairest way? So those are the types of cases I was doing. And I did that for about 2 years. And it's tough work because you're constantly worried about the people who are in detention. There's a lot of time limits. We had people who were being deported back to dangerous countries. We had people who were claiming refugee status, but were being held in detention. They could be removed at any time. So it was a lot of stress. So at the end of the 2 years, I was done with going weekly to the detention center and realizing how important it is not to get burnt out completely while you're doing this type of work. But luckily I had a national director who was very understanding and very aware of those issues. And so I was moved into strategic litigation, which was more about larger cases that could be brought to make systemic changes through the courts. And so we talked about access to justice. There would be large-scale arrests, and we go and deal with those large-scale arrests and try to create some law around whether that's lawful or not and under what circumstances. We did a case on the obligation of the South African government to investigate international crimes that are happening in the country, or that have happened outside of the country, but the people happen to be in the country now, which is what we call the Rome Statute and the international law around that. I got to work with some great people with the UNHCR, which is the High Commissioner for Refugees through the United Nations, and learn about not just international law, but international practice, which is often two very different things, but also, what the limits are of the legal system and how much politics does play a role in that. And just different cases, of that nature. I also went into different things, like Steve was talking about land redistribution and about land claims. And I got to go out with an archaeologist and looking at old land settlements from the 1600s and who was living there at that time and those sorts of things. So it was just remarkable the vast varieties of different types of cases we were able to do through that program.
It's really interesting to me because I have no law background at all, but having the three of you on here and kind of with your experiences, there are so many different areas where law is practiced in. Does it take an emotional toll on you when you were talking about all of these working in detention centers and stuff or helping people get out of there?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it definitely does. And there's always the danger of burnout and of being burnt out and not being able to do good for people. I think everybody has the strength to do that sort of work, but also has to be aware that there is a limit to how much you can do and how much you can invest in that emotionally. And so part of the things that I had to learn, and I haven't quite learned it completely yet, is how to separate work from home. being able to give time to yourself while at the same time making sure all of your work is done, not ignoring the personal parts of your life, and also not ignoring the warning signs when you are getting burnt out and you're not putting in your best effort anymore because the emotional and physical toll that it's taking on you.
Mm-hmm.
People often don't understand the physical toll that this type of work can take on. Even silly things like running around with big piles of papers and whatnot, it's exhausting. And so, you have to be aware of that and just be clear what your warning signs are. So I'm very open. I've gone to therapy before. I've spoke with a therapist who is assisting me with identifying what those were, and also assisting me with identifying when my warning signs were being picked up so that I could be aware of it and I could start to take measures. And, I recommend no matter what type of work you're doing, if you do have the opportunity to speak to a therapist of some sort, it's great. It's just another area of health. Being mentally healthy is just as important as being physically healthy with this type of work.
You're working directly with people, right? So you are affecting their lives and they're relying on you. So it is hard to kind of draw the line, because I'd be like, what? They're relying on me. They're kind of a part of my life. But at the same time, you have your family life.
And you also have to realize that they're adults too. I am not in charge of their life at all. And they're making rational decisions on their own about what they want to see from life. So I'm only a part of a very wider kaleidoscope of that person's life. So I can't take responsibility for everything that they say, do, or want me to do either.
That's true. That's also true. When all these people coming into detention centers, what do you see the most of? Like, why are these people coming? Is it because the countries around South Africa are having turmoil and these people are seeking refuge over here?
Yeah, so that's a very difficult question to answer, because the refugee lawyer would want to look at the areas where people are leaving conflict zones or, persecution. Other lawyers, not just lawyers, but activists as well, want to look at the economic depression of the entire area and the legacy of colonialism and what that meant for removing the resources from those countries and not having them brought back after the colonial governments up and left. And so a lot of it is all intertwined. And so you have a lot of people who are just looking for the most prosperous way to be able to take care of their family and to take care of themselves. Sometimes that means moving, or sometimes it means being the anchor relative who's going to move to provide for the family back home. Sometimes it's people who are seeking opportunities, that they're go-getters who know that my entrepreneurial skills will do better there than they do here. So it's a whole wide variety of reasons why people leave. What we try to look at is the difference between forced migration and unforced migration, that there are people who are forced to leave because their life or their family's life is at threat, their basic liberties are at threat, and so they have to leave, and other people who choose to leave, although that choice is sometimes restrictive. If you're looking at your children not being able to get enough food to eat, is that really a choice to leave or not? It's a very difficult question to answer. The majority of people coming to South Africa were from the Southern African region. So they're from DRC and Rwanda, Burundi. While I was there, the economy of Zimbabwe basically collapsed, and a lot of that had a political element to it. And so there were many, many people coming from Zimbabwe across the border into South Africa. Understanding that there was a natural link between those two countries, there were families who had links across the border for generations. And also understanding that a lot of the numbers and the reasons why people were leaving were being exaggerated by elements who wanted to stop that from happening. And so it was very hard to get accurate data. And part of what we were doing as activists were trying to collect as accurate data as possible, and then being able to give that to the media, give that to other organizations, so that the exaggerated numbers were not what was becoming common currency, that there was at least a little bit of pushback to that so that we could have a more realistic view of the migration situation in South Africa. And I would say the same thing applies to Canada. I think that we also exaggerate people who are coming sometimes, or the reasons why people are coming, and various elements use that to their advantage. We've seen it not only in Canada, but in the US as well, especially with the recent election. So it's not something that's specific to South Africa by any means.
This was the 10-year project, right, that you worked on? And so throughout those 10 years, I wanted to just clarify, what did you see more of, and why was this happening?
It was a fascinating time to work there, because we went from the time with the lowest numbers of refugees in history since the Second World War to the highest numbers just a few years later. So watching that going up and down was really, really interesting. Sad, very, very sad at times. But if you take it from a purely academic point of view, it was also an interesting phenomenon to watch.
You mentioned that you were at the Crown Attorney's office and you were doing articling after you wrote your bar exam, I believe.
Yep.
And that was that all in South Africa still?
No, that was here in Windsor.
Oh, that was over here. So that was after they told you like you have to come back to Windsor?
No, my mom told me I had to come back to Windsor, that I would be admitted to the Law Society. So that was between when I did my master's and when I was accepted to the internship program. While I was in South Africa, I did another law degree so that I would be more up to date with South African law as well. But the articles at the Crown Attorney's office, that was like 2005, 2006. And that was really so that I could cement my qualifications in Canada. One of the interesting things, and I'm sure Stephen and Sarah will soon find out, is that when you're finally admitted to the Law Society, you have a almost instant increase in confidence. It seems you're just starting out, you're still worried about the things you're doing, you want to make sure that they're done correctly and whatnot, but just having that qualification behind you gives you a bit more confidence in what you're doing. And so I was fortunate that my mom did require me to come back and do that, because when I went back to South Africa, even with a Canadian qualification, I felt far more confident in what I was doing there and the type of advice I was able to give and working with other lawyers. And so, it was a necessary step to be able to do the work I was doing there.
What does articling mean? And what exactly is the Law Society?
So the Law Society is the governing body for all lawyers and now paralegals in Ontario. It was created, I believe, in 1791. So it's one of the earliest institutions in Ontario, at least from the government point of view. And what they are is it's the body of lawyers that regulates the profession. And so the Law Society issues rules of professional conduct that every lawyer and paralegal must follow. And those rules are very specific about your interactions with clients, about what types of cases you can take on, if you have trust monies and property that belongs to clients, how you have to control that, talking about how you communicate with clients and how you advertise your law firm. A lot of stuff goes into regulating the profession, because the legal profession is based almost solely on reputation and making sure the public has confidence that you're representing the interests of justice and that you're telling the truth. That's one of the major elements of it. So every lawyer and paralegal in Ontario must belong to the Law Society of Ontario, and they must report to them on a yearly basis on the work that they do. We have new mobility agreements now that allow lawyers from one province to do a little bit of work in other provinces, except for Quebec, because they have a very different system there. That is also one of the requirements to be able to work in the legal field. And people who claim to be lawyers but are not lawyers or paralegals, they can be prosecuted by the Law Society for putting themselves out to be lawyers. So it's really about ensuring that the legal profession is following these rules and is protecting the public against unscrupulous people who may be giving either bad advice or stealing money from clients and not doing the work that they promised to.
What does articling mean?
Oh, sorry. Articling is the training period that lawyers have to do. So we have to do a 10-month training period where you shadow another lawyer. I did mine with the Crown Attorney's office. I was very fortunate to do so. They were super, super nice with me and they taught me a lot. And so we call that articling. And that's just the 10-month period that you spend shadowing somebody else. One of the issues right now is that it's becoming more and more difficult to find articling positions for aspiring lawyers. And so what the Law Society is doing now is training in lieu of articling, so that you are getting that experience, but you're not necessarily having to be hired by another lawyer in order to be admitted to the Law Society.
So just to clarify, after you graduate from law school, you write the bar exam, then you do articling, and then you join the professional law society, and then you are fully qualified?
The process has changed a little bit since I did it, because I believe people now might do their articles a bit first and then write the exams, but I could be mistaken about that. But basically, that's how it does. You do your bar exams, you do your articles, and then you can be admitted as a member of the Law Society.
Okay, going back to your internship, you went back to South Africa. What was the internship on again?
So it was with the Canadian Bar Association and Foreign Affairs Canada. It's called the Young Professionals International Experience Program, or something to that effect. and it was meant to send young professionals abroad to work in different fields. The law was just one of many. People were sent all over the world to do different types of work. The Canadian Bar Association is obviously an association of lawyers, so that part of the program was meant for either newly admitted or about to be admitted lawyers to go and do work abroad.
Oh, so this is not only for lawyers, that it can be applied to engineers or doctors or other fields as well to be working abroad?
I believe at the time, yes. The specific part of the CBA at the time was for lawyers, but I believe there are other programs with other professions. But after the Conservative government came in, there were changes to the program. So I'm not quite sure where it stands now. I know at LHR, we continue to have Canadian lawyers coming through this program. So I imagine it still exists somewhere, but it was changed a lot.
Okay, so then you went there and you worked in refugee law, specifically in the immigration center. Okay.
So the internship itself was meant to be 8 months long. And then at the end, I applied for a work permit and I was granted that. So then I was hired as a legal counselor there. And then I worked for another 10 years with them. So, that was part of the time I was working with the immigration detainees. And then in 2008, so that was about 2 years into my time there at LHR, I was promoted to the position of program manager of strategic litigation. And so I took over sort of the strategic litigation projects within LHR. So LHR had a number of different themed projects. So you had land and housing, refugee rights, prison rights, gender equality, and environmental law. But then over and above that, we also had strategic litigation, which assisted each of those projects with their litigation, which means going to court and engaging with the court process, as well as themes that fell outside of those areas, but had a human rights orientation to them, where we could use the Constitution or international law to progress and to advance human rights in the country using the courts. And so we did a number of different cases, either through the projects. We had some prison work that we did. Steve was involved with the land and housing work that they did. But then, like I said, I also was interested in international criminal law. We did some work on challenging the court rules when the court rules were becoming very much more restrictive about who could come to court to challenge decisions that were being made. I assisted 3 arms activists who were involved in a commission on arms sales, international arms sales in South Africa. And so we represented them before this commission as well. So it was diverse and outside of the other projects, but it really led into our overall view of how the Bill of Rights should be applied.
Your work permit was denied, right? After those 10 years? Okay, and then you came back to Canada.
Yep.
Okay, and then you started practicing here. So because you had gotten so much experience outside of immigration, you had said, right, over the course of that time. Did you want to be working in any of those other fields now that you had kind of, dipped your toes in the water there, or did you still want to stay in immigration, or how did that work?
Throughout my time, even when I wasn't doing direct refugee work, I was still involved with the cases in refugee work and in immigration detention. It took 10 years to have the rules of immigration detention declared unconstitutional. And so it was a very long-term project. So I was still interested in that area. When I came back, I had a couple of consultancies, international consultancies with different groups, through relationships that I'd built in South Africa. But I was still interested in, being able to practice here and building some sort of practice that would, be able to sustain me and my family. And I was still interested in doing immigration work. And Canada is known around the world for having a progressive immigration system. Certainly not perfect by any means, but it is a system where things can get done and where there is work to do for lawyers. So when I came back, I spent a couple of months in Windsor, staying with my family, and then moved to Toronto, where I was able to do some volunteering with another lawyer. And he was a lawyer who worked in immigration already and also had an interest in immigration detention. So I was able to get involved with those immigration detention work again, but still be able to develop my skills on immigration in Canada. And I found that being away from Canada for 10 years, it was difficult to get back into the field. I may be qualified as a lawyer, but I had a lot to learn about the changes in the law that happened over that time. So he helped me with that, and I really became more confident to be able to run my own practice, which is what I'm doing now. But I worked with him for about a year and a half, and then I was hired by HALCO, which is the HIV and AIDS Legal Clinic of Ontario. They are funded by Legal Aid Ontario as a community clinic for people living with HIV. And I did their immigration work as well. And I got to work with some amazing people, lawyers and clients. And I learned an absolute ton there about immigration as well. And so that also helped me feel more confident when I was done my contract there to be able to open up my own practice here in Windsor.
Okay, cool. Because I was going to transition into how did you decide to open up your own practice and kind of the obstacles. Can you kind of explain, the process of that and then where you are now in your business?
Well, I have amazing timing, and I decided to open up a small business in the middle of COVID, which was, maybe not the best thing to do. When I was done at Halco, I worked for a little while with another firm and then decided that we really wanted to move to Windsor. And so my option was to open up a practice. And I knew Steve was in the process of finalizing his paralegal course. And so it also allowed me to work a little bit with Steve as well and to look into the types of cases that we'd be able to do together. And so, it was in June, 1st of June, that I opened in Windsor. And the barriers, obviously was trying to research the area, trying to research not just the area, but the field of law in this area. And doing so in the middle of COVID was very difficult. Luckily, there were people who were willing to speak to me over Zoom, have telephone conversations about what things are like here, and who really encouraged me to come, saying that there were not a lot of immigration lawyers working in the area. From a market research point of view, it really seemed like it was necessary to have more people working in the area. So it was an opportunity that I could take up.
I thought you had opened your business a couple of years ago, but you just opened it during COVID, which is amazing that you were able to get it off the ground during a pandemic.
Yeah.
So it's only been, 6 months?
Yeah, about that.
Okay, so how has that been going? Have you been able to get clients during this time?
Yeah, so luckily I've been able to make some connections with some of the community groups that are working here. They were aware of people who needed legal advice. And so I've had a lot of referrals coming in. It hasn't been overwhelming yet, which is good when you're, just starting out and trying to get your sea legs. But it's kept me busy and I feel very busy now. So it's been great. And, I have to say Windsor is that way. They're a very community oriented place. And so when I said that I was coming, I had people coming out of the woodwork saying, oh, I'd love to be able to help you. When you get here, give me a call. I'll be able to speak to you. So I've had so much support from the community. It's been fantastic.
That's amazing. And then were you and Stephen, you can chime in here, but were you guys working on any cases together as well, like you were mentioning earlier?
Well, Steve is still finishing his studies, and
Right.
so, there's not a lot of time to be able to do that, and he's not qualified yet, so obviously he hasn't been working in the office. But when we were working in the summertime through an internship program, Steve was able to assist through another lawyer with a couple of cases that I had worked on before that. I hope he got some exposure to the type of cases that, I would hope he'd want to do in the future.
Steve, do you guys have to do an internship in your program? And were you using, David's office as your internship experience?
I did an internship over the summer. It's required through our program, and Sarah did her internship as well. We had to fill about 140 hours of intern work. I did mine through one of David's colleagues. He was another immigration lawyer out of Burlington. I assisted with a lot of just research and stuff like that, doing country of origin research and stuff like that. It was a really great experience to be able to do that.
What is country of origin research?
It's difficult to explain. David could actually probably explain it better than I can.
Well, when we do refugee claims, for example, we need to show that the reasons why somebody is fearing going back to their country is valid and that there have been reports on that. And so the research will be on Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International. We'll get newspaper articles about things that have come up. And the idea is to show that somebody in that person's position would also be afraid that they were be afraid of persecution. So it's really to bolster their claim with, other reports.
Oh, okay. So I feel like we covered a ton in the last, hour and a half, I think. But was there anything I missed from either of you guys?
I can't think of
Anything
anything.
you want to add in? Nothing? Okay. So now I want to ask both of you, where do you hope to see yourself in the next 10 years, 5 to 10 years?
Well, I really hope that this business will take off and that, I'll still be able to be doing the work that I've really enjoyed doing over the course of my career so far. The nice thing about law is that there are lots of options in the future of different things you can do. There's looking at the bench as a judge, there are international opportunities, and there's just, helping people in the community and being a part of the community as well. And yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing where that goes.
I'm really hoping that the Law Society will expand the scope of practice for paralegals within the immigration field. Paralegals can appear before the Immigration Review Board and some tribunals and stuff like that, but the scope of practice within immigration is fairly limited. So I'm hoping that they will expand it. Right now, what they have are immigration consultants, and a lot of paralegals become immigration consultants as well, but they're closing down the governing body that governs immigration consultants, mainly because there's been a lot of problems with immigration consultants. So hopefully what they'll do is eventually allow paralegals to fill in the void there, because there's a real access to justice problem that occurs not only in immigration but across the board in law. So hopefully that they will expand the role of paralegals within that field. Of course, like David was saying, I hope to work within this office for a very long time.
Awesome. So thank you so much for joining me, both of you guys. It was really awesome to hear both your journeys.
Thanks so much for the opportunity.
Thank you very much.
Awesome.
Really
Thank you. Take care.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
And that's a wrap. Thanks for tuning into today's episode, and we'll see you next time.